What's going on, gang? Today we got that these three people were eaten alive inside their car by deadly animals. Hold on, gang. Wait a minute, we got. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. But that should be kind of funny. So, not gonna lie, it's a tragedy. But damn, eaten alive by animals is crazy. You can't lie. You can't lie. I want to get right up into this. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Witnessing wild animals outside the confines of a vehicle can sometimes lull people into a false sense of security, whether it's during an African safari drive or while stopping to admire wildlife like bears at the roadside. The perceived safety of sitting inside your vehicle while these majestic creatures roam outside of it can create an illusion of control and harmlessness. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times humans have been brutally attacked by wild animals while inside their car. Welcome to Final Affliction. Catherine Chappell worked as a special effects editor in the movie industry. Her long list of accolades includes Game of Thrones, Captain America, Divergent, and Godzilla. But she also had a passion outside of the movie business. This was wildlife and the conservation of it. She was determined to help wildlife experts in the great South African bush. A few months prior to her visit to South Africa, she set up a GoFundMe page to raise money for conservation group Wildlife ACT. She reported on her social media that she would be helping with tracking and monitoring animals, participating in poaching prevention techniques, supporting veterinarians, and helping to relocate game. It was to be the adventure of a lifetime.
You see that nigga hopping on one leg? Woo! That nigga had 3 instead of 4.
She ventured to South Africa in June 2015 during a break in her work. Volunteering in one of the game reserves was her main interest, but she also hoped to make a film about animal poaching one day. So, this was also a form of research for her future project. She flew from Canada via London to Johannesburg. She stayed in a guest house in the city suburb of Melville. During her visit to South Africa and following her conservation work, Catherine also organized to visit Lion Park in Gauteng, Johannesburg. She had enjoyed Joburg so far, posting photos of herself drinking refreshing cocktails and commenting on how cheap the food was in the city. For her visit around Lion Park, she chose to be shown around by tour operator Calabash Tours. Her guide for the day was Pierre Potgieter, the owner of the tour company. He was a 66-year-old guide, born and bred in South Africa. The park consisted of a 20-acre enclosure, which is reported to house 85 lions. It has been visited by famous people in the past, including
85 lions? Look at John Legend. 85 lions? Would never catch me there. Or trying to tame that shit. I don't even drive through that shit.
Including singers John Legend and Shakira. It offers an up-close and personal experience with one of South Africa's top predators. As cars enter the park, there are numerous warning signs telling people to remain in their vehicles, to keep their doors locked and windows closed. But people don't always follow the rules, and this is what happens when they don't. Although Catherine may have been a genius behind the camera and on the special effects computer, she didn't show any signs of genius when she entered Joburg's Lion Park. Passing through the tall metal gates and into the lion enclosure, almost immediately, Catherine could see the resident lions. Most were lying on the grass, sunning themselves in the sunshine. They looked docile and tame, but these lions were anything but. They may not have had the freedom to roam in the likes of South Africa's enormous expanse of Kruger National Park, but they were by no means tame. You can take the animal out of the wild, but you cannot take the wild out of the animal. A male and female lion lay peacefully on the verge. Pierre pulled up alongside them. Catherine had her camera at the ready. As soon as he stopped the 4x4, she began snapping away. They were just feet from the animals. Zooming in through her camera lens, Catherine could see the tiniest of details. The fine fur on their muzzles, the deep brown eyes, and white canine teeth as they panted in the afternoon sun. Instinctively, Catherine wound down the window to get a clearer shot. As she did so, the lions' faces came into sharp focus. She marveled at their beauty, their graceful presence, and calm demeanor, but that demeanor was about to change. The female lion stood up. She stretched, her backside into the air, her huge front paws flexing on the soft ground. She yawned, her upper lip revealing her teeth. Then she turned towards Catherine. All the while, Catherine continued to snap her photographs. They were the perfect shots. The park was full of tourists. A line of cars lined the road behind Catherine and Pierre's car, each waiting for their chance to look at the lions, just feet from their cars. But the cars immediately behind Pierre's had spotted Catherine's window open and her black camera lens poking out. They could see the lioness approaching the vehicle while the young woman did nothing. Perhaps she couldn't see it. Perhaps she was too focused on the male lion at the time. With one eye closed and the other honed in on the male's spectacular mane, maybe Catherine was...
How are you not paying attention in a whole lion's habitat? Really? That's 85 lions. That's what? That's a habitat. They run that shit. And guess what? They ain't going to jail. They ain't gonna die. They gonna eat. They gonna feast. That's crazy. Oh no. Oh no.
Was oblivious to the imminent danger she was in. The other drivers began to honk their horns, concerned for the woman's safety. The honking of the horns did nothing to alert Catherine or Pierre. It did nothing to deter the approaching lioness. Instead, the female leapt up to the SUV, her front paws locking onto the side of the metal, the full weight of her body pushing against the vehicle. Catherine jumped backwards, but there was nowhere for her to go. She fumbled with her seatbelt. She hadn't expected the lion to jump up like that. Now she was face to face with the predator. She could smell its breath. She looked directly into its eyes. The lion was nearly as tall as the 4x4 when she stood on her hind legs. An incredibly powerful beast with thousands of years of killing instinct packed into an incredibly muscular body. Catherine couldn't close the window. That would mean leaning towards the lion. It would mean pushing its head back out of the window so that she could reach the button. Catherine's heart thundered in her chest. She felt her adrenaline pulsating through her body, wondering what to do. But even in those first few seconds, she didn't believe the animal would attack. The relaxed nature of the park, the docile-looking lions, led her into a false sense of security. The lioness's head almost filled the whole window. It was so much bigger close up than Catherine could ever have imagined. It paused in the window for a few seconds. It was assessing the situation, making sense of the people inside the car. Then, a split second later, the lioness lunged at Catherine. The 29-year-old screamed as she felt the lion clamp its jaws down around her shoulder and neck. The sharp canines torn into her flesh, severing blood vessels. Pierre leaned across Catherine. He tried desperately to hit the lioness, to push her away, but she was too strong. She was too powerful. The lioness ripped apart Catherine's shoulder and neck, and then jumped down from the vehicle. The car immediately...
Shoulder and neck. Oh, that's a big ass. Her shit was like that. I know when that lion just, she was like, that's crazy.
Immediately behind could see fresh blood dripping from its mouth, its muzzle wet with red. The male lion stood up, but the other lions nearby didn't flinch. They didn't move. They had just watched on as the female had made her attack. It was over with after a few seconds. But to their horror, the attack didn't end there. The female decided to pounce once more. This time she dived straight at the window, her head pressed into the car. She grabbed Catherine once more and tore at her face before retreating once again. In less than a minute, the lioness had caused catastrophic injuries to the young American girl. Pierre called for help on his phone and tried to stem the bleeding. He felt his legs were weak. He felt an overwhelming pressure building in his chest, a sense of impending doom. But he fought through the agonizing sensation now gripping his chest. He applied pressure to Catherine's neck. A ranger drove at the lioness, chasing her away with his Land Rover. More staff arrived at the scene as Catherine was pulled out of the vehicle and laid on the ground. One of the staff members froze. Pierre shouted at them to help him administer first aid, but the worker was in an apparent state of shock. They hesitated, reluctant to get involved, costing Catherine precious seconds that she didn't have. After what felt like an eternity for Pierre, an ambulance finally arrived, but it was too late. Paramedics tried to revive Catherine, but she had lost too much blood. There was nothing they could do. Described by her sister as fearless, it seems Catherine had a great appetite for adventure and was enthusiastic to try new things.
You work in a whole lion facility, and you're telling me that you were not trained to admit first aid? Because something like that can happen? Bro. Oh, man. That's so sickening.
Her boyfriend broke down at her memorial service, speaking of their final conversation together, in which he warned her to be careful and for her to remember that she's a city girl. Pierre was heartbroken. In fact, doctors at the hospital, after patching up his severely bitten arm, confirmed he had suffered from a heart attack at the time of the lion attack. The overwhelming pain in his chest had been his heart, but he had bravely fought through it to try to protect his client. Of course, following the incident, questions were asked of Pierre and his company, Calabash Tours. Some eyewitnesses said that they had seen the driver's side window open as the car drove around the park. Catherine was then merely following his example. Yet another thing she witnessed that lulled her into a false sense of security. But Pierre strongly denies this. He knew the rules. He knew it was dangerous to drive through lion territory with car windows open. The Lion Park refused to close the park following the incident, and the lion was not put down for her actions. Rangers said at the time she was in estrus and ready to mate.
What'd I tell you? The lion was not put down for her actions.
This may have led to her being particularly defensive and wary of encroaching visitors. Remarkably, despite the desperately sad news of Catherine's death traveling fast, the very next day, visitors to the park continued to drive through the enclosure with their windows wound down. It seems some people just won't learn from the mistakes of others. It is only a matter of time before someone else meets their tragic final affliction.
It was 1967 in Sydney, Australia. Some friends were heading out for the day. They were a group of 3 adults and 1 child. They climbed into the car, chatting happily as they made their way along Australia's coastline. They drove through Sydney's picturesque eastern suburb of Dover Heights. The road wound along the cliff tops. On this particular day, however, the visibility was poor. The autumn fog had rolled in off the sea, enveloping the coast and the city in a blanket of white. As the car motored along, the child in the back seat began acting up. He had dropped something on the floor and couldn't reach it. In an attempt to calm the child down, the driver tried to reach into the footwell behind him and find the toy. He took his eyes off the road for a second. It was a second that proved fatal. He misjudged his speed at the oncoming corner and veered to the other side of the road. He slammed on his brakes, but it was too late. The car crashed through the safety barrier. The passengers screamed as the car flew through the air for a few seconds before tumbling down the cliff. But it didn't topple into the sea, not straight away. It became caught on some rocks sticking out from the cliff edge. The rocks held the car in a terrifying vertical position. The sudden halt on the rocks sent everyone flying forwards in their seats. The front passenger hurtled forwards. She smashed through the windscreen and fell to the water 100 feet below. Only seconds later did she hit the cold, hard surface of the ocean. She lay still, lifeless on top of the water. Within moments, there were shadowy shapes making a beeline for the woman in the water. They converged from all directions, drawn by the loud splash, drawn by the scent of blood. There was a frenzied attack on the woman's body. Eyewitnesses reported seeing 14 sharks thrashing around in the water as the car hung precariously on the cliff above. If the passenger hadn't died on impact, she was torn to shreds in seconds by the sharks below. The driver could see the commotion in the water. He could see the ocean bubble and boil, turning red as the woman disappeared from sight. He cried out and tried to look behind him to see if the others were alive in the back of the car. The seatbelt bit into his chest. He couldn't loosen it. He couldn't free himself. It was holding him firm, but he needed some slack in order to move. He heard the car creak and groan under the strain. Every time he made the slightest movement, the car rocked and swayed. It was hanging on by inches. When the driver glanced over his shoulder, he could see the child and the other passenger were not moving. He tried to reach them, desperately trying to wake them, but they didn't respond. He didn't know what to do. If he somehow managed to climb out of the car, he was still stuck on a sheer cliff 100 feet above the sea. People rushed to the clifftop. As the car hung there, emergency services were called. The man had hit his head badly on the steering wheel. His vision was blurry and his head was oozing blood. He could feel it throbbing. The pounding of his heart sounded in his ears. Terror gripped him as he prayed for him.
That's what I'm not gonna lie. I'm scared of large bodies of water. I'm scared as fuck. I'm terrified. But I'm also terrified of getting into a car accident. My brother, he passed away in a car accident. I was already terrified of car accidents. Now I'm more terrified of car accidents. But I'm also afraid of heights. So it's like, all of that shit, if that would happen, oh my God, my fucking... everything in my stomach would be in my ass. I wouldn't know what to do. And I've had dreams like that, like, my heart be racing. I can't do it. That's crazy. People really be going through this. And that's so, oh my God, that's sad.
A miracle. But after 30 minutes, clinging onto the edge of the cliff, the rocks finally gave way. The car and the driver were sent flying. The car crashed downwards, somersaulting down the cliff. It smashed into the water below and bobbed there for a few minutes. The man felt the rush of water entering the vehicle. He desperately pulled at his seatbelt, but it wouldn't unclip. As the water kept rising, he panicked more and more. He felt it creep up over his feet and onto his lap. He was now sitting in waist-high water. Then, something swept past his side, just outside the window. A dark gray fin sliced through the water. Then another and another. The man was surrounded. The sharks had gotten a taste for human flesh and they were hungry for more. Frantically, the man tugged at the seatbelt. Eventually, he was able to ease the tension and unclip it. The car was now half submerged. There was no way out, except to dive under the water and swim out through the half-smashed windscreen. But he knew what was down there. The thought shook him to his core. He knew the second he exited the car, he would likely be devoured. He heard thrashing and splashing around him. He wheeled around. The sharks were trying to get through the smashed back windows. They were trying to get to the two passengers in the back seats. He had to get out of there. He had to act fast. He took one deep breath near the roof of the car and dived underwater. The blurry, shadowy figures of the sharks came into view as they swam past the open windscreen. He watched as they swam from left to right and back again, circling the vehicle, looking for a way in. When he could see no sharks in front of him, he chose this moment to go for it. He pushed off the driver's seat with his feet and swam through the smashed windscreen. The blood from the gaping...
That man really left his kids. Your wife is already dead. Your kids are dead. You might as well just sit up in that car and just let it be. I'm not gonna lie to you, I wouldn't be able to do it. And them kids ain't even like babies. Even then, but like I'm saying, they not baby. Like, you bonded with these kids like more than just a pregnancy, more than just changing diapers. Like, it was more than that. And you just left them like that. Hell nah. Man.
wound on his head flowed into the water. The scent enticed the sharks. They homed in on the injured prey. When he surfaced, he scrambled onto the roof of the car. It was barely above water now. It was wet and slippery, but he clung on, hauling himself onto the steel top. He steadied himself there for a moment, breathing heavily. Blood dripped into his eyes. He wiped it away and looked at the shore. It was tantalizingly close. All around him, dorsal fins broke through the surface of the water. They were having a feeding frenzy. They had found their way into the car now and had made their way into the back seats. As the car gurgled and rocked and the tail fins of the sharks thrashed and splashed, the man knew he had to make a break for it. In just seconds, he knew the car would be at the bottom of the harbor and he would be eaten. Summoning all the courage he could muster, he dived from the roof of the car towards the shoreline. It was only feet away. He knew the sharks would be on him instantly. He hurtled through the water, kicking his legs frantically, pulling himself through the water with his arms, inching closer and closer to the shore. It felt like an eternity. His lungs felt like they were going to burst. His muscles burned. He was convinced with every second that passed that he would be attacked. He was sure he would suddenly feel a sharp bite as one of the sharks grabbed him and shook him around briefly. But miraculously, he made it to shore. He grabbed hold of the rocks and scrambled onto dry land. When he made it, he looked around just in time to see the car sink. The swirling and the bubbling of the water was all that was left as it swallowed the car. The thrashing and splashing of the sharks continued for some time as they followed the car downwards. When emergency services reached the man, he was taken to hospital. He had a serious head and neck injury and was also treated for shock. But luckily, he went on to make a full recovery. He lost his friends that day in a tragic and terrifying event that would haunt him for the rest of his days. There had been a lot of reported shark attacks in Sydney Harbor and its surrounding beaches over the decades. The exact species of shark involved was never identified and remains unknown, although marine biologists theorize that this might be the work of the bull shark since they occasionally hunt in groups called schools. What we must remember is that the moment we step into the water, we are in their domain, not ours, and at any moment we might just meet our untimely, final affliction.
That's crazy.
Hi, Frank George here. This is the EMS foot massager. EMS is electrical muscle stimulation. It's low frequency.
The Zhao family had been looking forward to this all week. Bao and Mei were married for over 5 years, and a little over a year ago they welcomed their daughter into the world. Jia was the apple of her parents' eye, and the little girl shared the attention from her parents with her maternal grandparents. Mei's parents lived close by, and since her husband and father was often busy with work, Mei's mother, An, spent weekends with the couple. An and her granddaughter were inseparable, and Mei did not mind that her mother split her time equally between her own home and the Zhao family's apartment. She was such a great help with the little Jia, and went above and beyond to make the family's lives as easy as possible, with cooking and keeping up with the housework while the young parents worked. So when they booked a family trip to the Beijing Zoo, Mei just automatically bought a ticket for her mother too. The grandmother was thrilled at the invitation. She'd never been to the iconic site either. The Beijing Zoo is one of the biggest in the world, housing an incredibly wide range of animals: pandas, lions, elephants, wild African bucks, lizards, and the fan favorite, Monkey Hill, where there are over 100 rhesus monkeys swinging from the trees. You name it, the Beijing Zoo has it, and they offer a unique
That
experience.
nigga was trying to get out of there. That nigga wanted out bad. Nigga, what? Look. Monkeys are humans. Monkeys are humans, man.
Just monkeys swinging from the trees.
You
name
out,
it, the
man.
Beijing Zoo has it. And they offer a unique experience where visitors can drive their cars through the many acres of land that hold these animals. The zoo does not believe in penning their animals in small and inhumane cages. Instead, they allow them as much freedom as they possibly can, so that they can live their lives out as naturally as possible. The experience is as close to a real safari as you can get outside of Africa. So that morning, the Zhaos loaded their car full of snacks and drinks. However, Mei was slow to start. She'd woken up feeling a little nauseous. But she wasn't going to miss out on such an amazing family outing. And rescheduling the whole weekend would cost a lot of unnecessary money that the working family couldn't afford to waste. So Mei stayed at the back with her daughter for the first leg of the ride. After 2 hours, Bao parked the car in front of the ticket gates. He'd had a late night at work the night before, so Mei offered to drive them through the first half of the park while he kept her company in the passenger seat, with An taking over her place next to Jia, who was strapped safely into her car seat. Mei was feeling a little better than she did that morning, and she was sure she'd be fine to take over for most of the ride. Starting at the north entrance, they drove south, stopping first to see the reptile exhibit. Up next were the African animals. Lions, giraffes, and rhinos were all present. Just as their third hour in the park came to an end, they saw the tropical birds and the northern bears. That's around the time...
Wait. So that mean the baby gonna get eaten. A baby gonna get eaten. That's crazy.
And that little Jia nodded off. The toddler was long past her nap time, and she was most likely going to be out like a light for the rest of the ride. All in all, the morning had been an enjoyable one. But by noon, May was starting to feel ill again. The heat of the afternoon sun beat down on her, and she went from feeling slightly queasy to feeling downright faint with nausea. Just as they turned into the south wing of the park, entering the tiger enclosure, Anne noticed her daughter's pale complexion and encouraged her to switch places with Bao. They were past the halfway point by now, just where May agreed she would ride to. And even May had to admit that it was time to swap places with her husband before the dashboard became painted with the contents of her stomach. None of the occupants of the car had anything else on their minds other than making the change in drivers. It genuinely did not occur to them that they were in any danger at all. Up until this point, all of the animals had been behind sturdy fences or in cages. But in reality, the tiger exhibit and Monkey Hill were the two most popular attractions for a very specific reason. You could drive your car right into the wild animals' enclosures, with only the walls of your metallic vehicle around you for protection. All of the animals were fed on a strict schedule, so they were never hungry enough to pose a serious threat. And armored vehicles were parked with armed personnel inside, every few meters or so, as an extra precaution. None of the three adults in the car had even seen any stirrings of life in the exhibit just yet. They had driven only a few feet into it before Mel put the car into park. She released her safety belt, opened the door, and got out. Even the two Siberian tigers that were hidden in the trees were taken by surprise. Never in their entire lives of captivity had a human walked so freely amongst them. It was always just cars that drove past, and the zookeepers that threw their meat shares out of those big armored vehicles twice a day, where these animals ever saw any humans at all.
Nah. Imagine being a bird, nigga, and and that's your job. He threw the niggas out like, nigga, here. Nah.
That drove past, and the zookeepers that threw their meat shares out of those big armored vehicles twice a day, where these animals ever saw any humans at all. Even though they were bred and raised in captivity and never once hunted a day in their lives, the moment they laid eyes on the walking, living creatures stepping out of the car, their primal instincts kicked in, and May was locked into the sights of their yellow eyes. She walked from the driver's side, around the front end of the car, toward the passenger side door. Bao's safety belt had gotten a little stuck, and he was having trouble getting himself out of the harness. Annoyed, May reached the passenger side door and opened it for Bao, scolding him to hurry up as she did so. It was this sudden burst of noise from May that triggered one of the felines into action. Before now, he was too confused to decide how to react. But the sudden sound that came from the woman wiped all traces of thought from his mind. It turned into every ounce of the wild hunter that it was born to be. Racing out of the trees toward the woman's back, Bao saw the tiger.
Wait, is this live footage? Holy shit! Holy shit! Wait a minute!
First, he uttered a scream, and May turned to what he was looking at behind her, just in time to see the striped.
It is! Whoa! Whoa! They really got that shit on video!
Quick that May didn't have any time to react before the beast sank its teeth into her thigh. She did not immediately feel any pain, but she could feel the pressure of its jaws clamping down on her leg and hear the sickening sound of her flesh ripping to shreds between those razor-sharp teeth as it dragged her off her feet. The hunter didn't try to finish May off there. It was smart enough to start dragging her off to the safety of the trees. When it started pulling her, May finally felt the agonizing pain of her muscle being torn from the bone. Screaming and flailing, her struggles made no impact on the swiftly moving beast that had her in its grip. But Bao, suddenly free from his seatbelt, bounded out of the car to the defense of his wife. Anne, from the back seat, reacted in the same way. When she saw the tiger coming from the trees, she was no longer an old woman. Adrenaline and love drove her from the car, turning her into a woman 30 years younger. She ran after her son-in-law and her screaming daughter. Neither Bao nor An had any idea what they would do when they reached the predator. They only knew that they would fight with every ounce of their being to get May out of there. The tiger that had May in his jaws must have realized this, because he took one look at the pair running toward him and the armored car already speeding toward the tree line, and it knew that it was outnumbered. It unclenched its jaws, leaving May bleeding on the ground, and took off toward the depths of the trees. But the danger was far from over. A second tiger, a female, was hidden behind some bushes, but she had taken a little more time to assess the situation. She had mere seconds to react if she was going to get a kill away from this site before the men in the military vehicle made it the last few meters to the group. Once they arrived, the tiger's chances of a successful hunt went down to 0. The tiger leapt out of the bushes and landed right on top of the smallest and weakest member of the group, and that was the elderly An. Bao was already kneeling beside May, trying to hoist her over his shoulder, but he was having trouble lifting her, so he carried her in both arms instead. He was going to run as fast as he could to get her back to the car, and with May already screaming in his ears, he didn't hear or see the attack on his mother-in-law behind him. An was driven into the ground by the 300-pound animal. The tiger went straight for the jugular, sinking its teeth into An's neck, shoulder, and face. An did not even get the opportunity to yell out. The force that clamped onto her completely crushed her airways and neck and rendered her ability to push air past her vocal cords obsolete. The female tiger saw that the personnel carrier had come to a stop, and half a dozen men carrying firearms rushed out. She heaved the struggling woman toward the trees, but her teeth tore right through An's neck, essentially yanking the older woman free. Bao turned, carrying May in his arms, ready to sprint to their family car, but he stopped short. There were at least 6 men holding weapons running towards them. His mother-in-law lay on the ground. The severed artery in her neck was spouting blood out of her like a fountain, and the orangey blur that was the female tiger shot back into the trees like lightning. The men took May from Bao's arms and loaded An onto a stretcher. An was no longer moving, and even Bao knew that there was nothing anyone could do. She just bled out so fast that she was dead before they even got her into the back of the personnel car beside her injured daughter. Bao followed them in his own car, his daughter still strapped into her car seat, where she had slept through the entire ordeal. Fast forward 8 months later, and May had endured several surgeries. A funeral was held for An. Bao and May still had nightmares, and baby Jia had grown like a weed. But the horrific events of that day, so many months ago, were far from over, because the Zhao family filed a lawsuit against the Beijing Zoo. That first year of recovery and the lawsuit now upon them, the Zhao family were drawn into an incredibly drawn-out lawsuit. It's been almost 7 years, and it's still not completely come to an end. The courts did eventually decide that the zoo had sufficient warning signs set up, and that their armed personnel's quick response was the reason that the entire family did not die on that horrible day. But the Beijing Zoo still had a lot to answer for. In the 3 years that preceded the death of An and the permanent disability that May now has to live with, there were 2 other deadly attacks at the zoo. Both were staff members, and one of the deaths occurred in the very tiger enclosure where An lost her life. The tiger responsible for An's tragic death at Beijing Zoo Park was not euthanized by the zoo. Instead,
they never are. They never are. They never are.
It remained in an enhanced enclosure away from the public to prevent any other park visitors from meeting their terrifying final affliction.
That's so crazy, man. They need to just shut that whole thing down. Let that lady get her motherfucking bread, and so she can pay her medical bills and get some counseling. That's crazy. But if you made it this far, like, comment, share, and hit that sub button for your boy. I'ma need that this way. Yeah. Give me that.